6 years ago, a user by the name of Velasquez posted this YouTube video to a Discord server chronicling his day-to-day routine in Unity, designing maps for a small Eastern European town intended to be included in an upcoming FPS game he was making called BattleBit. Velasquez, a level designer, and Sergeant Okidoki, a developer, had been working together on making their version of a multiplayer FPS game with graphics that resembled Minecraft or Roblox, but gameplay that would actually be heavily influenced by milsim games like Squad, as well as more arcadey games like Battlefield, which unfortunately both of them could not play themselves due to having horrible laptops. The initial idea was to create their own low-poly FPS game intended to be accessible to everyone no matter their computer specs. This would be a teamwork-oriented game that had some arcadey elements like kill confirmation messages and an on-demand weapon modification system, but also provided milsim moments with very detailed animations and even shell-shock mechanics when the player was hit by explosions. The two-man team were hard at work, posting gameplay and development updates all while in school and studying. After roughly a year of development, however, a decision was made to overhaul the game in preparation for a paid Patreon and Steam beta run, deciding to rename their growing project BattleBit Remastered to differentiate it from their older builds. By late 2017, BattleBit Remastered was ready for its Steam testing phase, and the team released a trailer that more closely resembled a low-poly Call of Duty cutscene. It was very dramatic, very serious, and very blocky. Early access release was just months away, weapon and character movement animations were beginning to come together nicely in the remaster, and there also was a showcase of all the extremely detailed and varied maps that players would be able to experience. With the hype rising, however, the official release dates were scrapped, and instead Sergeant Okidoki emphasized that during development, they just weren't getting done what they wanted to. They wanted to take time to make the game the best it could be, and frankly, the timeline they had given originally just wasn't going to allow that to happen. Despite no firm date on its release anymore, every week it seemed like BattleBit was becoming to look much more like the real deal. And for only $15, you could support the project on Patreon and secure a key for you and 3 of your friends upon its release. By early 2018, an announcement was made that over 4,000 new keys would become available as demand for closed testing was exploding. Full weapon customization, destructible environments, 128-player games, vehicles, and even weather effects like volumetric fog were already confirmed. Despite its very simple graphics, BattleBit was becoming a very real and very in-depth game, and the playable beta officially dropped in February 2018. This would be one of the most challenging periods in BattleBit's history as the devs learned that their game really didn't play very well. In an announcement on March 3rd, 2018, Sergeant Okidoki said that over the 8 months of straight development of BattleBit Remastered, on top of the already year and a half of development for the original BattleBit, the end result was, well, horrible. There were FPS drops and server issues, but even when those were fixed, despite the massive hype from the community and those supporting them, the end result was just really not fun. The gameplay was just boring, nobody was sticking around, and they came to this scary conclusion. The low-poly graphics combined with the milsim gameplay they were pushing just weren't matching. And in an incredibly raw post by Sergeant Okidoki, unfortunately it seemed as if the hardcore people just did not want to play blocky low-poly games. The people who showed up to play BattleBit were usually casual players, which resulted in confusion on the gameplay mechanics and a gameplay loop that for the average person just wasn't clicking. Weapons handled pretty realistically and the Conquest game mode was relatable, but the pacing just didn't fit. There was a medical system with bleeding and bandaging, and you could even drag around wounded soldiers and revive them, but it was just way too slow and way too hardcore. And unfortunately, by embracing the milsim games that the devs loved, they ended up with a game that nobody else liked. For 2 years, these devs had poured their life into a game that had fallen completely flat, and there was going to be a lot of work to do to save it. The game was shifted from a hardcore teamwork-oriented one to something that had a much more casual gameplay loop, more akin to Call of Duty or Battlefield. The gameplay would be faster, you'd have less downtime, and an average life would be 2 to 3 minutes max before you'd respawn. They shifted their target demographic from the older 30 to 40-year-old milsimmers to the shorter attention-spanned 18 to 25-year-old gamers. Gameplay was completely gutted, and a new game mode was created to embrace this new faster playstyle, which many people may recognize as similar to Rush from Battlefield. Even new character animations were created to make the game flow better, with Sergeant Okidoki showcasing his thought process by throwing up a camera in his living room in order to record the exact type of movement he was after. And despite the focus being on arcadey gameplay, that didn't mean that some of the more hardcore or realistic features would have to be completely removed. Accurate reloading animations were designed, including unique ones while the player ADS'd, optics were magnified to maintain realism, and even unique sounds for specific surfaces were implemented. But as these features were added, a common complaint during their closed, smaller playtests was performance. With destructible environments, realistic details, and now fast-paced action, the devs still were trying to make a game that could be played on almost any machine. To address this, Sergeant Okidoki began working on a solution and even released a video of their low-end PC optimization process, showing how he's now coded the game to provide everyone the same visual experience of firing their rifle no matter their FPS. Previously, full auto firing would cause extremely frustrating frame drops and the players would appear to fire only every other round. It was very disorienting and just didn't look good, but through development they separated the fire rate from the FPS, making it smooth regardless of whether you had 30 FPS or 300. Further accessibility was achieved through a complete keybind and controller overhaul, allowing players full customization on how they chose to play the game, a step which even many AAA games released nowadays often miss or get completely wrong. By the end of 2019, Sergeant Okidoki made it clear through another sarcastic post that it could be until the year 2077 until BattleBit launched, meaning that he wanted to take his time and make the game right. It had only been a year since the abysmal first playtest of BattleBit Remastered, and a second failure so soon would most likely cause many supporters to lose faith in the project as a whole. With only themselves to determine when the game would actually be ready, the devs behind BattleBit had what many AAA studios didn't. They had time. They had been able to have wildly shifting timelines for development checkpoints, they had completely scrapped some sections of the project while completely remaking others, and for the most part, despite having a Patreon and closed testers, they'd been able to endlessly work on this with almost zero expectation of a hard date for it to be finished. Unlike the typical white text, black background delay and apology posts we've all become familiar with, as well as constant day one patches for incredibly broken $60, $70, or even $100 releases from AAA studios, BattleBit Remastered was on a mission to release a fully functional and fully fun game. This reliance on themselves and not a full studio would ironically be more beneficial in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, as Sergeant Okidoki and the team would continue to pump out more updates while also taking some time to blow off steam as the world around them was going crazy. More destruction was implemented and development to increase the player count was going strong, with up to 145 players now able to be in one server, breaking their original promise of 128 player games and eventually bumping up their server capacity to 254 players. The gameplay itself was becoming much more in line with something resembling a Battlefield game, and players would be running around killing, dying, and respawning at a higher, more enjoyable pace than ever before. Still, even with all of the success of the new gunplay and gameplay loop, Sergeant Okidoki never lost track of the details, spending countless hours on incredibly in-depth and immersive features like how tank tracks would physically interact with the world, or how a Humvee would actually feel while traversing difficult terrain. While gunplay and immersion was coming together, Velasquez was hard at work designing environments that would be both fun and provide balanced gameplay. Although there were many updates to the visuals when you actually played the game, it didn't really matter how good everything looked if the players hated the world they were playing in. This meant in-depth study of player heat maps and careful distancing of objectives so players would never feel like one side was more beneficial than the other. A process which he described as mirroring was implemented to make the objectives feel different no matter where you were, but the map played the same to allow for a roughly 50% win rate no matter what side you started on. Eventually, by the end of 2021, and almost 4 full years since the announcement that they would be scrapping the hardcore gameplay and moving towards a more casual experience, BattleBit Remastered was about to have their very first open playtest. Although hundreds of paid Patreon supporters had joined in closed testing over the years, an open beta on Steam was going to be a completely different beast, and it's moments like these that can make or break games. A failed playtest 4 years ago, followed by another failed playtest after they tried reworking the game, would surely be the end of BattleBit as they knew it. To ensure the game's success, Larry officially joined the dev team as a 3D artist, and the now 3-man dev team began preparing for the public playtesting. On December 26, 2021, the first week-long playtest kicked off, and to much of the relief of the team, it was incredibly well received. So much so that by the third weekly playtest, the player base had ballooned to over 115,000 beta downloads on Steam and over 2,000 concurrent players. And as a result of the testing, the devs decided to reduce the price of the game. On January 19, 2022, the early access price was lowered from $20 to $15 in order to make sure more people around the world could actually purchase it. And they even reiterated that this may be lowered further upon early access release in order to compensate for regional pricing differences. This is a decision not commonly seen in the history of gaming development, as developers typically try to capitalize on successes with higher price tags. The BattleBit devs, on the other hand, once being gamers with crappy laptops themselves, were obviously wanting to make sure their game could be accessible to everyone, even if it ate a little bit into their profits. The next couple months would be full of Patreon supporter playtests attempting to fix bugs and get the game to a state ready for the now planned 2022 early access launch on Steam. But the sheer popularity of BattleBit was actually now causing issues of scaling. A massive population playing their game meant that players would want to play a wide variety of content. The modern gamer needed progression and a variety of weapons to keep them interested, and they would most likely want to play multiple game modes if they got bored, and not just the crazy chaos that the devs have been focused on with the giant 254 player battles. The player base is now worldwide, meaning that 1 or 2 servers for an entire region would simply not be enough. The team needed all of this content, as well as localized servers for the international player base and plenty of DDoS protection and anti-cheat. This was going to be expensive, and Sergeant Okidoki disclosed that despite Patreon making them nearly $10,000 a month, he was actually only taking home $500 of it to live off of, while everything else went straight back into the project. Nearly $5,000 each month were used for just the weekend playtest servers alone, with everything else being saved in order to get the game into early access. With its current popularity, BattleBit Remastered was estimated to cost them $50,000 each month. But once they officially transitioned to Steam Early Access, the Steam platform would actually hold all funds for a minimum of 1 month and a maximum of 2 months, as they would no longer be able to make money on Patreon. The funds would be held before paying out to the developers, meaning that the dev team would have to somehow fundraise over $100,000 on Patreon beforehand as a safety measure, in hopes that they wouldn't need anything else to keep the game running for the couple months waiting for their pay. With the funds being tight and the need to continually develop more content, the team decided to push back early access to sometime in 2023. Large and small scale game modes had to be finished, weapons needed balancing, there were plenty of bugs to squash, and one of the largest features that they wanted to add, helicopters, were still needing a lot of work. Given this new timeline, additional content like new weapons were also added. Quality of life features like a visual experience point log were developed, progression systems for camo and grindable attachments were implemented, and the game was truly becoming to feel like a low-poly Battlefield competitor. But even with all of these major developments, interesting and immersive mechanics that stayed true to the game's milsim roots were still being added, such as underhand grenade throwing and combining weapon magazines. These impressive content updates, followed by closed and public playtesting, would continue for another year until May 20th, 2023. It was then that Sergeant Okidoki announced that after 7 years of development, BattleBit Remastered was finally releasing into Steam Early Access in June 2023. The game had also been selected as one of the games to watch and would be showcased at DreamHack Dallas on June 2nd, and on June 9th they would be conducting the final playtest. The popularity of this game exploded, and to put it into perspective, the original final playtest trailer received 47,000 views on YouTube, while the following official release date trailer got over 200,000 views. It had been a long time coming, but BattleBit was not going back to the drawing board. There would be no more closed playtests, there would be no more delays, and on June 15th, the game would officially be released into early access on Steam. In this announcement, to add even more hype to the game, the devs also announced that there would be more content. One more new map named Tinseltown, as well as 5 brand new weapons, all were going to drop at launch. In true BattleBit fashion, content was seemingly spilling out of the game left and right. At launch, the game smashed expectations with over 25,000 concurrent players, and surprisingly enough, the devs once again decided to reduce the game's price, resulting in some locations being able to purchase it for up to 20% off the original listing price. To counteract the price changes, they also released a supporter pack available for purchase if you wish to support the dev team further. Although there were a few rough patches with server stability, by and large it launched without much of an issue, and the world was surprised at just how fun and deep a low poly game could be. This wasn't your kid brother's Roblox game, and features that FPS players might have only seen in games like Escape from Tarkov, Squad, Arma, or Battlefield were everywhere. A real and fleshed out class system and squad system promoted team play, vehicles were fun, customization was never ending, and the gunplay just felt good. Creators from all backgrounds were singing the game's praises, with even OG Battlefield fans like Jack Frags or the more hardcore tactical milsimmers like Operator Rooski amazed and addicted. The years spent on detailing the weapons and attachments even warranted an exclusive GameSpot video with the keeper of firearms and artillery at the Royal Armories, Jonathan Ferguson, who was so surprised by both the modeling and the animations of the weapons that he stated BattleBit is doing a better job than a lot of mainstream AAA games have done historically. Within the first week, BattleBit Remastered had launched itself to become the #1 game on Steam, and 10 days after launch, its player count had peaked at over 86,000 concurrent players, landing it firmly in the top 10 most played games on Steam. With over 30,000 very positive reviews, this labor of love game has absolutely nailed it on its first real try into public early access, and the devs have no intention of stopping. There have already been a slew of quality of life updates like bleed out timers for medics, an option to show level progression on your screen, and even a viewable squad list on your HUD. Graphic updates were implemented to increase interior visibility through the use of a new shader system, and another new map has already been released. The core gameplay loop allows players to enjoy large-scale game modes as well as the less chaotic and more tactical smaller-scale ones. And with 200 ranks plus an impressive prestige system, there is plenty of reason to grind the game. Despite the graphics looking cheap, the amount of detail included in the game doesn't make it feel cheap at all. And ignoring the actual low polyness, everything responds and feels and plays like you would think it would do in the real world. Additionally, the roadmap on the way to full release has stated that there will be continued quality of life updates, new vehicles, new game modes and gadgets, and even a milsim mode. So perhaps the very first iteration of BattleBit from way back in 2017 may get a second chance. In an industry that has been notoriously bad at releasing buggy, broken games, penny pinching, and borderline lying to customers, and implementing greedy monetization methods that lock critical gameplay experiences behind paid season passes or battle passes, BattleBit Remastered and the dev team behind it is an amazing breath of fresh air. Not only have they been able to provide a fully functional product when many early access games appear to be cash grabs at times in order to secure future funding, they've also been true to their word in trying to make this game as accessible as possible in both PC requirements and price. Sergeant Okidoki has successfully led development of a project that at one point was so badly received it stalled its early access release for over 4 years. But instead of abandoning it, or maybe worse, pushing through a release that nobody really wanted to play, he took that knowledge and then improved and iterated on the game in order to make it much more appealing. Because of that, we now have the BattleBit Remastered that is absolutely taking the FPS world by storm. Although they may just be a small team, Sergeant Okidoki, Velasquez, and Larry are doing things that AAA studios can only dream about. And BattleBit Remastered should be a testament to their dedication to making fun and engaging games, no matter how long it might have taken. I hope you enjoyed the story of how BattleBit Remastered came to be, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this game goes in the future. If you play BattleBit, do let me know your thoughts on the game down below, and if you like the video and if you like the story, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.